Thank you. So thanks a lot to the organizers for inviting me, and I enjoy a lot this workshop. So I slightly changed the title when I realized I had 1 hour, but basically the original title is the name of one of the papers I will present. So indeed, I will talk about kernel-based divergences, about probability distributions, and let me introduce why it's important. So it's a fundamental task, in particular in statistics and machine learning. For instance, you can think of testing when you want to compare probability distribution. So you can think, for instance, of goodness of fit test to test whether two set of samples come from the same probability distribution, and you want to compare them. But also more recently, there was a big application called sampling as optimization that is very popular in the field of machine learning, in Bayesian inference, which is framed as follows. You want to minimize what is called a functional f on the space of probability distributions P of RD. Okay? So it's an infinite dimensional optimization problem. And this finds many applications in machine learning. For instance, when you want to perform Bayesian inference in the case where you have a complicated Poster distribution that you cannot find in closed form, you need to learn a Poster distribution, and you only know that its density, where should I point? Yeah. Its density, you know the Q tilde, which is the unnormalized density, but not the Q, you do not know Z. And one way to frame this problem is to write it as minimizing such a functional, which I will show is often chosen as the Kullback-Leibler divergence. And another famous application where people sometimes frame this task as a minimization problem is the one of generative modeling, where in this case you want to sample from a probability distribution, for instance the one over natural images, and in this case you do not know anything about the density of the probability distribution of real images, but you only have access to samples and you want to generate new ones. So these tasks both are sampling tasks in the sense that you want to sample, you want to generate new data from a probability distribution that you do not know, right? But in the first case, you have no samples, you have access to the density, unnormalized density, and in the second case, you have access to true samples. And if you're interested in this one, there are many generative models such as GANs, generative adversarial networks, or normalizing flows that are directly framed as such a minimization problem. So this is a big motivation. But the way you choose the objective functional, or the way to compare probability distribution, has some constraints. So for instance, think that Q is your target distribution. You can frame the problems I showed before, like sampling in Bayesian inference or generative modeling, as minimizing some distance or divergence between probability distribution P and your target Q. Okay? And you want D that cancels only for P equals Q. So how will you choose this D? It depends on the information you have on the target Q, right? So think, for instance, of the Kullback-Leibler divergence. Okay, so this Kullback-Leibler, also named the relative entropy, it writes if P is absolutely continuous with respect to Q as the integral of the log of the density ratio between P and Q, integrated with respect to P, or plus infinity else. And this one is very convenient when you're in the case of Bayesian inference, because this loss as an optimization objective does not depend on the normalization constant Z that you do not know. Indeed, it's a very simple exercise. Think of the case of Bayesian inference. The density of interest Q is written as some Q tilde here, written as exponential minus V, that you know, and you do not know the Z. If you plug this expression in the KL, you see that the KL depends on exponential minus V that you know, you have access to this thing, and log Z, but as an additive constant. So if you optimize over P, you do not care about this additive constant. Okay, so this is why people, when they are doing a Bayesian inference, or if you know about variational inference as well, generally they choose the Kullback-Leibler divergence. It's not the only choice, but it's 99% of the papers are about. However, if you think of the case of generative modeling, or when your target distribution Q you don't have access to any information on the density, but maybe you have access to samples, you have a discrete measure to approximate, this loss would not be convenient because as soon as you want to compare P and Q to discrete distributions, to think, for instance, in generative modeling, you would have an empirical distribution over samples, so it's discrete, then this quantity is infinity, right? Unless the support of P is included in the one of Q, which means, so when you have discrete measures with different supports, it's always plus infinity. Okay, so you would not see this choice in generative models design. So if you're in the case where you have samples of Q, like in generative modeling, for instance, or actually any discrete measure approximating Q, if you are, for instance, interested in Markov chain Monte Carlo, you can think of the output of your favorite MCMC algorithm. Okay, it would give you a discrete measure approximating Q. Then it's more convenient to choose this objective D as, for instance, an integral probability metric. Okay, so abbreviated as IPM. So these are distances between probability distributions that compare two distributions through their difference of integrals over a class of functions. There are many examples of this, but you've seen this week already the maximum indiscrepancy, which is, to the best of my knowledge, the only one that can be computed in closed form. So this is very nice. So the MMD, how does it write? It depends on the kernel. So I did not case a PSD kernel. Think of the Gaussian one with RKHS HK. The MMD, you can write it, so here I wrote it squared. You can write it as an IPM, okay, over RKHS ball. This you can show that it writes as a difference of the mean embeddings, okay, so the mean embeddings are linear representations of your probability distribution in the Hilbert space HK, and you compute the difference there. And thanks to what is called the reproducing property, you can develop this expression and get a closed form for the MMD. Okay, so here you see that it's very convenient when the Q you have access to in your application is discrete, because as soon as you have integrals, you are able to approximate these integrals as empirical sums or discrete sums. Okay. So I talked before about sampling as optimization, which was one of the big motivations of our work. One question you could ask is, are all functionals good optimization objective? Okay, if I perform gradient descent on some functional f, or equivalently I chose a distance d, will it perform well? So the answer is no. So this is something we investigated a lot with Michael Arbel, Adil Saline, and Arthur Gretton in a paper in 2019. For instance, if you pick a Gaussian kernel, you take two discrete measures. The MMD is very simply written in basically n squared, let's say if n equals m. And here in this figure, we just run gradient descent, okay, between, so Q is fixed. Here is my target samples, so the blue distribution here. And here P are the particles in yellow. And we just perform gradient descent on this, okay, with a small step size. And what you see is that some particles will crash onto the mode of the target, but the other ones, they are basically repelled and they stay stuck. Okay? And it's extremely painful to basically escape this situation. You need to add noise in the optimization process, or to use schemes such as quasi-Newton schemes to find the best step size. Like, you need to do a lot of tricks to avoid this. But basically, my message here is that if you want to optimize an MMD with a Gaussian kernel, it's a very bad idea in practice, and you should not do it. So this was highlighted in this paper. I think that before this, MMD was mainly used for statistical tests and this kind of stuff. But so it was used as well in MMD GANs. But let's say that before our paper, it was not really highlighted that it was a problem to optimize this loss in practice. As a remark, I will comment about it a bit later in the experiments when we will compare about it. It's very dependent on the kernel, and our study here was highly dependent on the fact that we had smooth kernels and bounded such as the Gaussian one. It's known that if you use what sometimes people call the energy distance kernel or rich kernel minus x minus 1. So it's not PSD, but you can transform it easily in a PSD kernel. In this case, the associated MMD is known as energy distance. And even if it's not differentiable at 0, there are schemes to approximate, to run gradient descent with this kernel. It was used, for instance, in this paper, so quite recently, to perform generative modeling, so on high-dimensional images. So this issue is quite specific to smooth and bounded kernels. Okay, if you switch kernels, it works better, and I would say that this kernel now is much more popular when you want to do generative modeling, for instance. Of course, feel free to ask questions during the talk if easier. Okay, so this was a first thing that we noticed a few years ago, and this motivated some works I will present today, including the first one. So the paper associated to this first part of the talk is called Statistical and Geometrical Properties of Regularized Kernel Kullback-Leibler Divergence. It's a bit long. So it's a joint work with my PhD student Clémentine Chazal and Francis Bach from here. And this paper was accepted last year. Okay, so we studied in this work a divergence between probability distributions that was actually introduced in this paper of Francis 2 or 3 years ago, and that relies not on the mean embeddings of probability distributions to compare them, but on their covariance operator embeddings. So let me recall, we've seen it a bit already, but let me recall what is the kernel covariance operator, or density operator. I pick a distribution Q in P of RD, and this is my covariance operator, right? It's the dot product of, not dot product, it's this quantity, basically, this integral, this operator, that acts on functions in RKHS F, HK, and the kernel Kullback-Leibler divergence, basically introduced in that paper, is simply a Kullback-Leibler divergence between operators, between positive operators, that are, in this case, these kernel covariance operators. Okay, so it's basically this expression. Okay, the KKL between the probability distributions P and Q is this, and here, if you're familiar with it, you recognize the Kullback-Leibler divergence between operators applied to sigma P and sigma Q. So this thing can be written more explicitly in terms of the spectrum and the eigenvectors of sigma P and sigma Q. Okay, so this is how you would write it, depending on these guys. But so it's an infinite dimensional, these are infinite dimensional objects, so you have infinite dimensional things to compute. It's a bit annoying, but I will show later how this reduces to finite dimensional objects when you work with discrete probability distributions. So you can see that compared to the MMD, this time we are working with second order embeddings in some sense of P and Q. Okay, mean embeddings were let's say first order embeddings, and here with the covariance we are dealing with second order ones. It's known from Francis' paper, so I didn't cite the precise section, but it's known that this divergence is framed between the Kullback-Leibler one, okay, so it's smaller, and some Kullback-Leibler divergence between smoothed probability distributions P and Q. Okay, so here the smoothing kernel is not the same as the original kernel K. If you work with Gaussian kernel, for instance, it's something more complicated, but you can think of it as being framed between a KL and a smoothed KL. Okay? And it's also showed in the paper of Francis that this divergence indeed separates, so it's 0 if and only if P equals Q. Okay, so you need some conditions for this to work. You need P and Q to be supersymmetric compact, K to be PSD, and in particular K squared to be universal. You need this to work. You need as well KXX equals 1, which, for instance, eliminates the energy kernel I showed before. Okay, so this was introduced in the paper of Francis, so for now, nothing new. And our question with the Clémentine was the following. So what is the behavior of this loss if I try to optimize it? Okay, for empirical measure, let's say in a generative modeling or anything. Does it admit a structable closed form expression for discrete measures? Because this was not in the paper of Francis. And yeah, is it a suitable optimization objective in the sense that, oops, does it perform well, right? We saw the example of MMD, which was failing miserably, and we wanted to know whether it was also the case. So let me comment again a bit more on the kernel Kullback-Leibler divergence. So we've seen the expression before. For this thing to be finite, we actually need the kernel of sigma q to be included in the one of sigma p, okay, because of this thing. And this would only be true if you have that the support of P is included in the one of Q. Okay, so this should remind you the behavior of the standard Kullback-Leibler divergence. So I wrote the quick argument here. Indeed, if you think of something in the kernel of sigma Q, you can write what does it mean, okay? So you have that this integral is 0, which means that F is 0 on the support of Q, and so on the support of P. So that's the argument. So you should see that there is a problem compared to the KL we introduced before. We did not solve the issue of the KL that was plus infinity as soon as P is not absolutely with respect to Q. But it was still on the other hand, so it's not convenient, but this thing, all these operators, they are written as integrals of P and Q. So we are tempted to use them when P and Q are discrete, right? So we propose a simple fix that is also known for standard divergences such as the Kullback-Leibler one. So we propose to regularize it. Okay, so you introduce a parameter alpha between 0 and 1, typically small if you want to be close to the original object. And basically we compute the kernel Kullback-Leibler between P and a mixture between Q and P, right? So you see that as alpha is close to 0, we are close to the original object KKL. And when alpha goes to 1, this is 0, okay? Because you're computing the KKL between P and P, okay? All right, so what is nice, I didn't write it on the slide, but it's always, it's not biased, right? It's not because that you introduce a parameter alpha that it becomes biased. It's 0 if and only if P equals Q. And also, if you're familiar with Jensen-Shannon divergences, Jensen-Shannon divergence would be a kind of symmetrized KL where you use both the KL between a P and a mixture with alpha equals 1 over 2, and it's a symmetrized version. So it's, let's say that this trick was already known for standard divergences such as Kullback-Leibler one. Okay, so we propose to... Yes, of course. Yeah.
So you stated these sort of assumptions that imply that KKL is less than infinity, but are they like necessary and sufficient, or they're just sufficient, or?
I think no. As soon as you don't respect this condition, I think you blow up.
And for the support, it's like sufficient.
So your question is, if I don't have this, is it possible that the KKL is fine? I would think that no, but I'm not sure. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So this trick, at least it enables to verify the sufficient condition, that it's finite. But I think in practice, we see as well that when alpha goes to 0, we are close to the KKL, and we see that so it's increasing a lot. The values explode. So in practice, we have a hint that is true. Yeah.
Also, instead of KL, one also consider Rényi divergence.
Yes.
Divergence which avoids using logarithm.
That avoids what? Sorry.
Avoid using logarithm. So logarithm.
Yes. True. That's true. So I think in the paper of Francis. So I know in his paper, I remember he has Chi-square as well, which is another Rényi, if I remember well. But so I guess you can generalize this approach to any. You pick any divergence between operators that is valid between positive operators, and you just plug a sigma p and sigma q, and it gives you something. Right. The question that comes behind is, can you compute it for discrete measures? Can you analyze it? But yeah, I agree in principle. You could do it with any divergence. The idea here of this paper was of the original paper of Francis was very simple, right? It takes a Kullback labeler, it's called von Neumann relative entropy, applying to kernel covariance operators, and that's it. And he was analyzing it. Yes? Ah, sorry, maybe I misunderstood. Like.
This part is okay.
Okay.
The other one is when you mentioned this sandwich type of inequality with this smoothing kernel.
Yes.
For instance, for KL, there are relatively almost explicit estimators, almost analytical, just using KNS number distances. For Kullback level
yes.
averagents, there are almost analytical estimators using KNS number distances. So here, if you somehow take the limit with a smoothing kernel just to close this sandwich, would this kernel Kullback level give an alternative estimator for the classical KL one?
So I need to check again, but in his paper, the smoothing kernel is complicated. It's not a Gaussian kernel, it's something much more complicated. And I'm not sure how you, like, is your question, like, is there some hyperparameter I can, I need to check again the formula of his smoothing kernel, but I'm not sure you can tighten this inequality, like, as the moving some hyperparameter. It's not, at least it's not directly related to the KL between smoothed P and Q with a Gaussian kernel, where in this case you could play with the bandwidth and see if it holds. Yes, Bart?
But the smoothing kernel, it's not like a modifier. Can you make the parameter go to 0?
I think that's the question of Zoltan, but I'm not sure. We can check the expression later, but it's something a bit complicated. Okay, so we are there. We propose to use this object, and first we checked how it was behaving with respect to alpha. So two simple propositions. First, this if I fix P and Q, okay, this quantity is decreasing in alpha. Okay, so we saw already that when alpha was 1, this guy was 0. Okay, because I was basically computing divergence between P and P when alpha equals 1. But generally it's decreasing. And also we could get an upper bound quantifying for fixed P and Q the skewness, okay, like how much you deviate from the original object when you introduce this regularization parameter alpha. We need some condition on the relative density. And we have a bound, okay, so that quantity is fixed for P and Q fixed. And we have something scaling in alpha and alpha squared, basically. So of course the bound degenerates when alpha goes to 1, but it's not a case that is of interest for us. We just focus on when alpha is close to 0. So that was our bound. And we prove actually that, so we just recall in the paper that these are behaviors that are also shared with the standard KL. If you would have regularized it, you would have the same things actually. You would have that the KL, the regularized KL is decreasing in alpha. You would have the same bound, but with replacing this quantity with operator with an integral of Q dp. So that's it. The only thing is that our analysis relies on different tools than the standard KL case. For instance, we need to use identities like this one. Okay, so this identity, you could write it for, let's say, for x log x minus x log y, and you could write it as a primitive antiderivative. And here it's the same trick, but written with operators. Basically, this identity, we use it in all the paper, and then we need to play with operator monotony to be able to have inequalities. So our second contribution and question was, what can we say on the concentration of this divergence for empirical measures? Okay, so we got this result. So here, I assume P absolutely conscious with respect to Q. We have a bound on the relative density, a bound on alpha. Once again, we are mainly interested in the case where alpha is small. We have a rather mystical condition on C. Let's say we need that this quantity is finite. So you can think of it as a condition on P and K. And now we can compute the deviation between the kernel Kullback labeler between the empirical measures and the population 1, okay, for a fixed alpha. And we get this bound, okay, in terms of M, N, the samples of P, Q hat, quantity C, mu, which bounds the density, and that's it. So what do we notice? So maybe you notice first that I assumed that P was absolutely continuous with respect to Q, and this is a bit annoying because we want, so this guy is always computable for discrete P and Q, even if they are not absolutely continuous. So this is more restrictive than the case where the KKL is well defined. So we could have, we have in the paper a similar bound which does not require this quantity, but it scales in a less good way with respect to alpha. Indeed, here we scale in 1 over alpha, and in the other case we scale in 1 over alpha squared. Okay? And alpha is a regularization parameter that is close to 0. If n equals m, we can simplify this bound, and you see that it scales roughly as 1 over square root of n up to factor log terms. So this is nice because as the MMD, it's independent of the dimension. And the proof is painful. Clémentine did it mainly. It involves a concentration of sum of random self-adjoint operators and estimation of degrees of freedom, if you're familiar with it. Okay, so this is what we found, and we could, before verifying it in practice, one question I asked at the beginning of the talk was, can we compute this guy in practice? The answer is yes. You give me 2 empirical measures, p hat, q hat. You compute the gram matrices associated to p hat, q hat, and the joint one, okay, mixing samples from p and q. And then we can compute the expression of the regularized Kernel-Kullback-Leibler, and we have 2 terms. Okay, so if you think of the expression of the Kullback-Leibler, you have one term that is the entropy of P, so that basically that would be this term, and a cross term, okay, between P and the log Q. So here, this only depends on samples of P, okay, so on the gram matrix of P, and this depends on a matrix K that basically stacks the one of P hat, Q hat, and the joint ones. So to compute this quantity, you see we have a trace, so we need to compute the spectrum, so a singular value decomposition. And the biggest matrix here is this one, which is of size n plus m. So we have this cost of n plus m cubed. Okay, so if you think of MMD, it was n squared. Here we are 1 order of magnitude more expensive. Okay. So we checked empirically the behavior of the Kernel-Kullback-Leibler divergence for empirical measures that we just, so regarding the theoretical results we derived just before. So what we see here, for instance, it was in dimension 10, Gaussian kernel. We take 2 distributions that are Gaussian, and we compute over 50 runs this loss. We see indeed that if you look at the alpha here, the KKL is in alpha is monotone decreasing, which is what we expected. And also we see the bandwidth basically that represents the, where is it? Yes, the bandwidth also scales in alpha as predicted by our bound. So this was nice. And also, yeah, small plot about how it behaves with respect to the dimension as it would do with the KL. If you increase the dimension, okay, so you go this direction, this quantity typically increases. Okay. So now that we've seen that this object was computable for discrete measures, it has a nice statistical properties. Okay, we saw it concentrates relatively fast with respect to the dimension. I said earlier in the talk that one motivation was to be able to optimize such a loss. Okay, so we want to minimize such a Kernel-Kullback-Leibler divergence, typically to transport some tractable measure, so think of a Gaussian, onto your target distribution Q. Okay, so typically here, Q will be, we want to focus on the case where Q is accessible in discrete form, okay, like for instance in generative modeling. So how you do that? So Bharat presented it a bit before. They just recall very quickly the framework. At a high-level point of view, you can do it with Wasserstein gradient flows, so that our object introduced in this seminal book from Roseau, Gilly, Savare. Basically, what these flows compute, they give you continuous curves pt of probability measures starting from P0, okay, decreasing in some sense your objective f in the fastest manner with respect to the Wasserstein 2 geometry. So that is written, so this curve is described by a continuity equation, okay, so this is a divergence of pt and a vector field that is the Wasserstein gradient, and as Bharat explained, typically, so write the details, but this Wasserstein gradient, so here there is a small abuse of notation compared to the talk of Bharat. People sometimes refer to this whole divergence term as the Wasserstein gradient, and here I just focus on the vector field. So this is what I call the Wasserstein gradient. And this guy, so it's a vector field pushing my particles from RD to RD. It's the gradient of a first variation, okay? What is the first variation? It's the differential of f, okay, if you were to perturb it at p linearly, okay, by some measure nu minus p. If it exists, this limit, you would obtain here a quantity where you integrate some function f prime of p from RD to R with respect to this perturbation. Okay, so since this guy is a function from RD to R, when you take the gradient, you have a vector field from RD to RD. So this is how you would push your particles. And if you want to implement, to simulate such a curve, like how to decrease your functional in the probability space, what you can do in RD, because you have to work in finite dimensions in the end, is to consider this process, okay, where you see that here xt depends on pt through the vector field, where pt is slow. So this is a high-level point of view, motivation in some sense. It's a very fancy way to present how you do things in practice for discrete measures, and when your loss can be computed in a closed form for discrete measures as well. Indeed, in practice, if you introduce a particle system x0, 1 to n, distributed from your initial distribution P0, some step size gamma, and you compute such a gradient descent iteration, okay, where you push your particles by this vector field, where this guy PL hat is the empirical measure of your particles, then this algorithm is simply gradient descent of your function, right? If I had to rename things, this guy f of p is well defined for discrete measures p. So if I call f f right, this thing, gradient descent on f is exactly this thing. Okay, so there you have this. Sure.
So do you have an explicit expression for your grad W2? Or?
It's coming. Yeah. So so what I said earlier is just that this guy was the gradient of the first variation, and for the KKL we have an expression for the first variation that is coming on the next slide. And it was a bit complicated, but yeah, we have it. Yes.
Is there any reason why now you shifted back to alpha is equal to 1?
I didn't switch to alpha equals 1 here.
So far you gave results about KKL alpha.
Yeah, sorry, it's just, okay, okay, not a typo, but okay, I should have kept alpha here, sorry. Yeah, think of KKL alpha, sorry, thanks for noticing it. So, in mind, you should have that this is our target, these are our particles, we apply gradient descent to these things. At a high level point of view, if we were to study the continuous time and space limit, this would be a Wasserstein flow that I presented. But as Judith asked, like we need to be able to compute this thing, which is the gradient of the first variation. And the first variation is this thing. So we could compute it, okay? You give me two discrete measures P and Q hat. So I have the associated matrix, gram matrices K, P hat, and this K that was stacking the gram matrices of everything, P hat, Q hat, and crossed. Function G. And then we can write the first variation at P hat as this. Okay, so what is this? I have an expression depending on some kernel vectors, okay, at X. So this is what I would apply at my particle X. And functions that depend on the gram matrices of the interior of particle system. Okay, so once again, we need an SVD, okay, to compute these things here, like this G of the gram matrices. We need to apply this on their spectrum. So as for the KKL computation, computing its gradient requires to do a singular value decomposition. So it's the same cost, right? It's I have the singular value decomposition of this matrix of size n plus m, so it's the same cost as computing the KKL. Okay, so you should think that this algorithm is n plus m cubed at each time. compared to the MMD, which is n squared. Okay, so this is the scheme. Soon we'll arrive to the experiments, but first I need to show some competitors. Yes, Bharat?
So is G operator monotone?
Is G... I need to check. I think yes. If I differentiate log x over x, I think it's monotone. I need to check.
So just to understand, at each iteration, you
Yes.
have to recompute the G's.
Yes, on this matrix. Okay, so these guys, Kp hat and K, because K is this stacked matrix that was.
So each
Yes.
time you have to reconstruct the K. And
Yes, exactly. Well, so these terms they move.
They move all the time.
Yes, and one thing we would have liked to do is to do like a warm start, like a hot start SVD at each iteration, but we don't have a real. We discussed this with Francis whether there were existing yes, fast solvers or something like this, taking into account that we don't really move a lot from each iteration to reduce the cost from n cubed to something small, but he was not aware of something like this. But yeah, like the naive version is restarting this each time. So I'll check the answer to your question more precisely, Bharat, but yeah, at least we could compute this thing. Yes, and so before jumping to the experiments, I need to show some competitors. Okay, so who do we compare with? And we wanted to compare with similar approaches that were also approximating, in some sense, F divergences. Okay, remember that here I presented the kernel-Kullback-Leibler that is smaller than the Kullback-Leibler divergence, but it shares some similarity. And so these competitors, they rely on playing with the variational form of the F divergences. Okay, so recall that an F divergence is right this way. Okay, so for P absolutely constant with respect to Q, if F is convex and F of 1 is 0, and they admit this variational form. Okay, so they write not as an integral probability metric where you would have the difference of integrals of H. Here you have integral of H minus this F star, where this F star is a convex conjugate of your convex function F. And for instance, think of this KL, you would have this F here. F star would be E of Y minus 1. If you think of the K square, F would be this X minus 1 square, and F star would be this Y plus 1 over 4 Y square. Okay, so there are two papers that played with this, and actually what they did was to restrict the search space here. So it's actually measurable, and if I remember well, I think bounded functions, but yeah, it's a much bigger space. And here in these papers, what they did, so including one work of mine and with Arthur and Bharat, was to take these variational formulations, restrict the search space to RKHS, and so you obtain something on a smaller space, so typically more regular. And so for the Kullback-Leibler case, it was done in this paper of Arthur and collaborators at NeurIST 2021. And more recently, we did it for the K-square, recovering something called the deregularized maximum mean discrepancy that was also presented by Victor Panaretos yesterday. Let me show quickly. So for instance, the KL, basically you recognize the variational formula of the KL I showed on the slide before, but you restrict your functions in the search space to be in RKHS, okay, and you introduce a parameter lambda that enforces this penalization, okay, with respect to the RKHS norm. So this thing, it was proved in the paper of Pierre and Arthur and co-authors that it interpolates between the original Kullback-Leibler divergence and an MMD, okay, depending on the factor lambda. Now, in practice, if you want to compute it to compare probability distributions, if you take two probability distributions P and Q, you will replace these integrals by discrete sums. However, you cannot solve this problem in closed form, okay, even with representer theorem or anything. You have to solve this problem, but it's a nice, strongly convex n-dimensional problem, so you can solve it relatively fastly with Newton. The only thing is, yes, it's not closed form. So, yeah, for instance, this, we've put it in the paper, but I think it scales as O of n cubed as well. So in contrast, the loss I presented, the KKL, has a closed form, and this is practical when you want to do, for instance, gradient descent, because you can use quasi-Newton schemes such as LBFGS that automatically choose the best step size at each iteration. So it's very convenient in practice. So some images finally. On simple experiments in 2D, but which are rather standard. Here we took, for instance, this example that was in the Kale paper. So our KKL, we choose it with alpha of 10 to the minus 2. We still use a Gaussian kernel. We take 100 particles for getting both the target and a source. So here you see, so at time 0, so the target are these rings, so basically particles supported on rings. And the source are particles concentrated just here, okay? And basically we run gradient descent for all these losses. Okay, so this one you need to solve, at each step you need to solve what is a Kale divergence, which asks for calling another subroutine such as Newton. This one is in n square, and this one is in n cube, if I take n and m to be the same. So what you see, so it converges pretty well, so not for the MMD is, so this was already selected for the best hyperparameters, and you see that you have particles that remain stuck out of the rings. For Kale, it's a bit less good than KKL, and so this we can show on, I didn't put it on the slide, but if you measure it in Wasserstein 2 distance, for instance, you see these differences. But you can see that, yes, some particles did not really manage to fit the rings. And what is nice with this example is that you see that the losses such as Kale or KKL, which are closer to F divergences, they are very sensitive to the mismatch of supports between P and Q, right? When your particles in dark blue do not share the same support of the one in light blue, these divergences explode, so they really enforce the particles to stay on the ring. So you see it in the Kale, for instance, the particles, they travel on the rings, a bit less on the KKL here, but and for the MMD, it's not the case. The particles, they can explore the whole space without being penalized. So this is another example. Sure.
Stupid question. I'm a bit lost. So what is it that you're doing here? So you're simulating what is P, what is Q?
So Q, the target, is our particles on the 3 rings in light blue. Okay, so think of this light blue as my particles, the target particles, the one I want to match. Yeah. And P, the P0 are the particles supported on this very tiny corner. And then I do gradient descent.
You want to move them to Q?
Yes, I want to minimize all these losses that cancel for P equals Q, so in the end the particles should match exactly, if I manage to optimize them super well. So basically we do gradient descent for all of these schemes. They have different costs, different behaviors, and this is what we see.
And can
yeah, sure.
So before you were presenting results where you had some M and some N, what would be the point of having an M different from N, or is there other cases where it would be more interesting?
There's not really a point, like I would say it's given by your application. So if N equals M, you're supposed to match exactly the points in the end. If your target number of points is bigger than the source one, you will not be able to match. Okay, you will find the best configuration of points approximating your target. So, for instance, if you want to compress your target, you have M that is very big. Minimizing these losses would be a way to, with N particles that are much smaller, to approximate your target, to compress it. So I would say it's given by the application. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. Can I go on asking?
Yeah.
So you were presenting one of the aims is to do generative models, but
yes.
If at the end of the day is to recover the particle you start with, what's the point?
It's a very good question. It's a very, very good question. So I didn't put it in the slides here, but I have it on Slack. I think I have it. Yes. I didn't put it in but these are samples, for instance, that Clémentine generated with basically, same idea. You start from some Gaussian noise and you do gradient flow of KKL to push it to the samples of MNIST. In the end, you end up on these things. For instance, and she was looking for the closest neighbor in the data set to see if you generalize well. Okay, so for instance, you see here that you don't generalize really. Like if you minimize well your objective, you will find exactly the samples. So there are different strategies in the literature to generalize from gradient flows. For instance, there are people who, like in the paper of Ertrich that I was citing, yeah, this one of Ertrich is cited here. For instance, here they run basically a gradient descent of the MMD with particles. Okay, it's exactly approximating the samples, and they learn basically a neural vector field with a neural network approximating these trajectories. And so when they do this, if you give it new samples, basically with a neural network trajectory, you hope that it gives you something close to the samples of your dataset. There are different strategies, but older papers, for instance, they were just injecting some noise in the trajectory, but it does not work well. But yeah, it's something we think a lot about it in my group, about how to generalize, how to do generative modeling with these flows. It's tricky. Okay, so where are we? Yes. But yeah, happy to discuss about it because I think it's a very hard question. But there is a bit this question about all generative models, I think, like for instance, diffusion model, like how do you generalize, like why do they generalize? Is it because of the neural network in the score? Or yeah, it's not clear. Okay. All right, just as a comment, I don't talk about it a lot here. If you had done the same trick as the Keil, okay, so Keil was regularizing the variational form of the Kullback-Leibler. If you do it with the Chi-square, you end up with deregularized MMD, which was an object presented by Victor. Indeed, if you look at this problem, so it's the variational form of the Chi-square regularized in the RKHS space. It's also interpolating between Chi-square and MMD instead of Keil and MMD with respect to lambda. This time you can write it in closed form, so as follows in population version. So here we recognize the form given by Victor. Similarly, its gradient, you can compute it in closed form. Here I didn't write this thing, but it's closed form. And in particular for PQ discrete, it has a complexity in MQ plus NM, where M is the number of samples of Q. Okay, so think that here you have the same complexity as the MMD. Okay, if your particles evolve in N and M. This thing here, you only have to compute it once because it depends on the target Q. So it's less costly than, for instance, the KKL. But it's a bit different because here it relies on both the mean embedding and the covariance embedding. So this is why I'm a bit fast on this guy. Interestingly, it's an MMD with a regularized kernel. So this you can prove easily. And so in this case, we inherit the statistical rates of MMD that are already known in square root of n. So if you want to know more about this loss, we investigate it in this paper with Bharat and co-authors. And it performs also very well in practice, and compared to Keil, a bit better, and also in terms of the cost, it's much more computationally attractive because it's closed form. And it's really due to the form of Chi-square. Okay, so I'll jump to the last part of my talk very quickly, where, so this is an ongoing work. It's not online yet. We're working on it with Arturo Castellanos, Pavlo Mojarowski, and Hicham Janati from Telecom Paris. And we entitled this work, Kernel Trace Distance, Quantum Statistical Metric Between Measures through RKHS Density Operators. So this is another name for kernel covariance operators. Okay, so we'll work with the same object, but another distance. So, yeah. Okay, so I presented already what was a kernel covariance operator. Basically, in this paper, we were interested in this distance. Okay, so it's the same idea as before, but applied to something else, to another distance between operators. We take sigma p, sigma q, the covariance embeddings of p and q, and we compute the Schatten-1 norm. Okay, that depends on this absolute value, let's say, of the operator t. That is this thing where this star is the adjoint. Okay. this is our object, and we can compare it relatively quickly with other divergences. For instance, we know that Schatten norms are dominated as you increase the rank P. Okay, so Schatten norm 1 is bigger than the 2, and actually this thing applied to these covariance operators, you can show quite simply that it's an MMD with a k-square. So think of the Gaussian kernel. It's stable if you square it, so you can basically think of the MMD with the Gaussian kernel here. So directly we have that this kernel trace distance, this Schatten 1 norm between operators, is bigger than the MMD. Okay, so more discriminative. Second, we can show, we showed in the paper that this thing, the Schatten 1 norm between sigma p and sigma q, it writes as an integral probability metric over a function space that is this one. Okay, so U are linear bounded operators over H. This is the feature map, the kx dot. This function space, actually, we can show that it's a space of functions with values in -1, 1. So this is nice because you can compare it to the total variation distance, which is also an IPM over functions in values -1, 1. Okay, so we have directly this inequality because we restrict to a smaller function space. And we have other inequalities. For instance, we can relate this kernel trace distance, so once again the Schatten 1 norm between sigma p, sigma q, to, for instance, the Burs metric between sigma p and sigma q. Okay, because we have, so I recall what is the Burs distance, once again that we saw in Victor's talk, for instance, is this distance between PSD operators. And there's an inequality called Fuchs van de Graaff, so I knew about it thanks to Arturo, that relates the fidelity, this term, with the Schatten 1 norm, and so you get this inequality directly. Okay, so you see it's less discriminative than the Burs. And finally, I presented earlier the kernel Kullback-Leibler divergence. It's a Kullback-Leibler divergence between operators. You know from Pinsker inequality that you can compare the total variation to the Kullback-Leibler divergence. Okay, you have that TV is smaller than square root up to factor 2 of KL. And since we compare this guy to the TV, we directly have this inequality. Okay, so it's less discriminative than the KKL I showed before. But still, it's a distance, we can show it, in particular if k-square is universal. That was a condition we had before, and yeah, it's something that was not really used before. Okay, so we can compute it in practice. That's the cool thing. So recall that if you want to compute this, basically you need the spectrum of sigma p minus sigma q. Since these operators are linear, you can think of this as sigma p minus q. And in practice, what do? Let's say you have samples x1, xn from p, yn, ym from q. So sample set x, y, and empirical distributions p and hat, q, m hat. We show that this operator has the same eigenvalues of this big matrix. Okay, so once again, you recognize. Yes.
Shouldn't there be an absolute value or non-absolute?
Here, yes. Yes. At the top right.
Yeah. Is it easy to compute?
Thanks to this, yes. For discrete measures, yes. So this is what I'm saying here. Like if you give me two discrete measures, you compute this big gram matrix as before, where you stack the gram matrices of P, Q hat, and cross terms. You do the singular value decomposition of this, and yeah, you take the sum of absolute value.
Why do you have an I in? What does it have to do?
It's the way. Yeah, so I didn't detail how we show it, but we need this factor I for this to work, basically. Yeah, if you think of the singular value decomposition, it's the eigenvalue of k star k. So this is why, yeah, it works. Yeah. But once again, SVD requires the eigenvalue of this thing, which is also of size n plus m. So once again, it's n plus m cubed for the complexity. So same thing as KKL. Okay, I'll be fast on the end. We got concentration results for this loss. Okay, so these are probability results. For these to hold, we need assumptions on the eigenvalue decay of sigma p. Okay, so what we look at is the concentration of Pn hat to P this Schatten-1 norm. If we have a polynomial decay, we get this rate that is slightly worsened compared to the square root n. And if you have an exponential decay, we get this nicer rate, okay, almost square root of n.
Do we know if these rates are sharp?
I don't. So what we did to recover this basically is to use results from the kernel PCA literature. So maybe there are experts in the room, like thinking of Barat, Zoltan, that know if there are lower bounds, but we need, basically we need convergence, concentration of the eigenvalues on some specific eigenspaces, like the top L eigenvalues, and we basically plug these inequalities. So I don't know if there are, for these inequalities, there are lower bounds, but I say it in the conclusion. There are many questions including lower bounds that are free. If you want to pick it. In particular, so this one as well, like since we knew that our loss was majorating the kernel Burs squared, this gives us results on the Burs concentration. So I don't know if this was known. We state it as a corollary. If it's known, please tell me before we publish the paper online. Yeah, so we get this corollary. Finally, we show on experiments that it works better than the MMD. So this is gradient descent for this loss. This is for MMD. You see, we have this particle stuck. If you're interested, so I will jump on it to leave a bit of time for questions. We also have an application on ABC computation, where basically we use the fact that our distance is robust to contamination, in the sense that if you perturb with respect to a parameter epsilon, a population distribution P, the deviation of the contaminated distribution with respect to the not contaminated is bounded by epsilon. Okay, so Wasserstein distance would not respect this. If you perturb by something, by a C that is very far in space, it will explode. Here it's not the case, and this was a nice feature for ABC computation that we did here, which is to perform Bayesian inference in a likelihood-free fashion. Basically, you compute a posterior distribution over a parameter theta, given some data xn, and this ABC posterior, what it does is that you have a prior pi here, and you need to generate synthetic data with respect to your model p theta here, and you accept the new samples regarding on whether or not they are close enough from the true data. Okay, so this is an object called ABC posterior. It's practical when you don't have access to the likelihood, and you need a distance to compare your samples. So I need to jump on the end, but basically what we found was that in the context, we do this experiment on simulated data with some contamination. We compare basically the mean square error, so we need to recover the true parameter generating of the posterior that we can compute here, and we compute for different losses, basically the mean square error, and we always have nicer results for a wide range of parameters epsilon. So if you're curious, I will say more later, but yeah, that's it. So just to jump on the conclusion, what we did and what I tried to present in this talk, so these are various works. What we did here was to propose novel divergences between probability distributions that are closed form for discrete measures. You can compute them in practice. They all enjoy nice statistical rates, okay, independent of the dimension, but they are more expensive than the MMD, okay? Yet they perform better on a wide variety of tasks. So I showed convergence of particles, IBC inference in the end, and yeah. And so what remains to prove lower bounds, as Judith asked. I'm not aware of any lower bounds for this. Related quantization rates. So quantization, it means like quantifying, let's say, the distance between Pn and P when Pn is one discrete measure, maybe the best one, not necessarily empirical, approximating a density P. Okay, so these are known for MMD, but not for these losses. propagation of chaos, which stands like how the population of your particle system deviates from, let's say, its ideal version, or distant lemma showing that the objective decreases. This requires Lipschitzness of the vector field, which is something hard to establish for the losses I showed, such as KKL and the Schatten-Wang norm. Characterizing the convexity of this loss, like why do these flows work? Is it because they have a nice curvature? So this is open. And in contrast, these things that I am showing are known for the MMD. Okay, I'm citing this paper, or for the kernel variational approximation I mentioned, such as scale or deregularized. Okay, so this is the work we did as well. So thanks for listening, and happy to take questions.
So you have KKL.
Yes.
So you have P, the convex combination of P and Q. Right?
Yes.
Did you try the alternate rate? KKL between convex combination of P and Q and maybe P or even Q.
Sorry, what? Did we try what here? Sorry?
Did you try swapping the arguments?
Swapping the arguments? No. Let me think. No, we did not.
I understand. I mean, if it is only P and Q, we know that this is the form that you would use for sampling.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, we didn't try, and it's true. So this direction enforces that the support of P matches the one of Q because it explodes otherwise. So if you reverse, you would enforce the other behavior, right? Like this, yeah. You see what I mean? Like you want the P, the support of P, to match the support of Q, mean the support of Q. But yeah, we didn't. We could have tried the other directions. That's cool.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions.
Yes.
The first one is maybe you tell it. Is about the second order embedding. Is it always characteristic or?
If you need K square, you have conditions on K square, like.
So more injective
so you need these conditions for so K square universal is like a density condition. Or it says that your kernel can approximate any smooth function. Correct me if I'm wrong, Barat, but you need the K continuous, and we needed the Kxx to be 1.
Okay, and the second one is.
But yeah, basically it gives, these conditions give you that K square is characteristic, so, which is what you need.
And the second one is concerned the choice of the x log x function, because
Yes.
what you have done could be done for any convex function. Just parenthesis, it's good to downdate some references, not Nguyen 2010.
Yeah,
it's better to put Shizar.
Yes, I hesitated to put it.
And so the question is that for probability there are some papers that give a frame allowing to show that the Kullback and the square are the good choice. Is it the case here? Have you a theoretic that is standing on information theory? Could you justify that the x log x plus x minus 1 is the good function?
Okay, so I think it's a bit. Yeah, there's a link with the question of Barat. Like, for instance, if you minimize the KL or K square between P and Q, you know that the gradient flow is Wasserstein flow, or in discrete time gradient descent, converges very fast when Q is a very nice distribution, like log concave. So you can think of Gaussian, for instance. So this tells you that if Q is nice, if the second argument is nice, both the Kullback-Leibler and Chi square, they inherit the convexity of Q in this direction. So these objects like KKL between P and Q is close to the KL. So our intuition is that they share similarities with this. So there's let's say, a Wasserstein geometrical motivation for taking these objects.
Okay. Arthur, final question.
Yeah, I have a question. So for MMD-FO, we found that it's helpful to actually use a kernel size that changes
Yes.
as the broad kernel early on and then a narrow one later on. And in fact, in some parametric cases, you can prove that will speed up convergence. Is it the case that you're seeing a sort of computer failure that you might have more smoothing early on and less as your distribution approaches target?
So maybe so here the simple answer, we didn't need to play with the bandwidth for things to work. If I think of KKL descent or the Shatton one norm descent. So I don't know if that's your question. I agree with, for the MMD flow, if you change the bandwidth as you did in your papers, you can make it work. And I don't know if your question is, should we do the same with these objects? Or?
So I think it's also for the KL divergence, we found that you can again, when you change the smoothness of the witness function, you use a very smooth one early on, much more rough one later on, it also helps. So I think it's a property that's at least quite general. So I'm curious as to whether that's also the case here.
Yeah, maybe we could do it. I expect that some quantities in practice, like the step size or this kind of thing, maybe they depend on the bandwidth you choose, and so you're changing the object you're optimizing, as you know. So yeah, yeah, we could have played with it, we didn't.
Okay, brilliant. If we could just thank Anna again.
Thank you.